Welcome to Gracefully Graying. I am your host, Attorney Henry Gornbein. Please watch Gracefully Graying on our YouTube channel and also go to our Gracefully Graying site and watch it, share it, and like it. Today on Gracefully Graying, I'm very pleased to welcome as my guest Lynn Socci as she demystifies the options for long-term care with regard to Medicare versus Medicaid, which is something that so many people know so little about. So Lynn, welcome to Gracefully Graying.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here and
First of
hopefully
all,
demystifying it.
we're pleased to have you. Why don't you first of all tell our viewers a little bit about your background and who you are?
Well, I actually started in healthcare. So I was working as a rehab director, kind of on the other side of what I do now. I worked in a facility where people would come after they had some type of major health event, like a heart attack, maybe a hip replacement or a stroke, something like that. And they would come to our facility to get rehab and stay with us until they were able to go back home again. Unfortunately, many times I had family members in front of me kind of in tears and quite distressed because their family member had a situation where their condition now preventing them from going back to living the way that they were before. And a lot of times the family didn't really know how to now provide that extra care they needed because they had to work, or they didn't want to necessarily put them into a facility permanently. They didn't know how to deal with paying for extra care or possibility of getting on Medicaid. And so they would kind of just be in tears in front of me or across my desk. And I was kind of limited as to what I could do for them at that point, other than just refer them over to our social worker. So that kind of started putting ideas in my head of wanting to figure out, what else could we do? Is there something more? I'm kind of limited in what I do now to help people when they're facing this situation. And why does it seem like there's nobody out there to really help guide them and figure out what they could do? So I started getting more into financial services and initially thinking I would probably help plan ahead so that they could prevent being in the situation to begin with. And that was a great idea, but there's a lot of people that don't really pre-plan for one reason or another. And so most people were already in crisis when I was meeting with them. And then I was kind of still limited in what I could do until I really learned more about Medicaid planning. I met somebody who teaches it, and he actually became my mentor. And he specialized in Medicaid planning since like 1999. And I started really working one-on-one with him and learning all these, other possibilities of helping somebody, even when somebody's already in a nursing home. So I really started putting all of my focus and all of my attention in Medicaid planning, and then also decided to go a little further and become a certified Medicaid planner. And that basically is a FINRA recognized designation. You have to go through background checks and testing and a whole host of different things to become eligible for that. But, I felt that it would be good to do it, help, kind of build credibility that I really am focused on just Medicaid planning and that I have the knowledge and the skill to help people. And then that kind of brings me to where we are now.
Lynn, so you now are an expert in the financial aspects of Medicaid planning. Tell us what long-term care is.
Long-term care is really when someone reaches a point of either a chronic or debilitating condition where they require nursing care or ongoing or constant supervision. And, it's usually defined by someone's inability to perform what we call activities of daily living or ADLs. And those usually encompass being able to feed yourself, being able to dress yourself, ambulating, transferring, all the things you kind of do on a normal basis to be able to take care of yourself. And if you can't meet a certain amount or a certain level of that criteria, you would be somebody who's considered to need long-term care services. And then here in the United States, we usually provide those services either through some supports in home care, some type of assisted living where you're in your own apartment, but you have services that are provided for you through the day. It kind of helps support where you're lacking skills or medical inability. And also for a skilled nursing home, which is usually when you really need that constant, care and somebody watching over you.
Lynn, who is the largest payer of long-term care?
So this is kind of an interesting question because a lot of people think that Medicare is, and a lot of people believe that if something happens, that they're going to have Medicare to help pay for something like this happening. However, Medicare is really only short-term when it comes to long-term care. It's really only for acute rehabilitation. So where I used to work, that's where people would come in and they would come in under Medicare. But the max amount of time that Medicare is going to pay is 100 days. And you're not even guaranteed 100 days because it's kind of up to the team that's overseeing your care to determine when they feel like they can, assist you any further, or you should step down and go home. And then at that point, Medicare is going to stop whether you reached your 100 days or not. So although you're allowed the 100 days, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get those 100 days all at once. So in reality, Medicaid is actually the largest payer in the US of long-term care services.
Lynn, what is Medicaid?
This is where another confusion sometimes comes in when we're talking about Medicaid, because a lot of people think Medicaid. Everybody knows what Medicaid is. MAGI, Medicaid, is really just modified adjusted gross income. And that is really just your traditional Medicaid, which is health care for applicants that are low income. However, then we have the other Medicaid, which is ABD Medicaid, and that's age, blind, and disabled Medicaid. And that is what covers your long-term care needs. So that's the real payer for it versus the regular traditional Medicaid.
Lynn, tell us about the Medicaid eligibility requirements, because you always think of Medicaid, you really have to be low income, and you can't have very much in the way of assets, otherwise you're kind of out of luck. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so the eligibility requirements are confusing at times, but what you really need to look at is a few different areas. There's really like 4 areas that you have to qualify to become eligible for specifically long-term care or the ABD Medicaid. First, you have to be 65 or older, or you have to be disabled or blind. You have to be a U.S. citizen or be properly registered here. Then you have to also meet income limits. So each state has their specific guidelines and rules on what your income limit would be. There's a couple of different ways that they look at it. There's 2 different kinds of states. One has an income cap, and if it has an income cap, then you cannot have more than $2,382 in income a month, or you would have to do something like use what they call a Miller's Trust, which allows us to bring your income down to that eligibility limit, and then you are able to qualify. If it's a non-income cap state, then you just have to not be able to afford care. So if in your state, the normal amount for care at say a nursing home is $10,000 a month, and you only make $2,000 a month, then you obviously cannot afford care. So you would be considered income eligible. Then you also have to meet, of course, the medical requirements, which is what we were talking about before with the activities of daily living. So you have to be able to meet that requirement, which in most states and in most cases, for a nursing home, they're looking at your inability to not be able to do 3 or more of those ADLs. For home care services, it's generally a little bit different. They look more at your medical condition. They look at, what your level of ADLs are, and then they kind of make a determination of how much care you're going to get at home. Then you also have your asset limits that you have to meet. So there's preset asset limits for each state, and they're generally around the same. Most states are 2,000, but there are some states that are more than that. So everybody, always has to look to their state and their state rules just to be sure of what that is. So we have the age and being a citizen, we have the income that you have to meet, and we have the assets that you have to meet.
Let's talk about what are the majority.
I'm sorry, and the medical. Can't forget that.
Okay, first, why don't we start with the medical? What are the medical eligibility requirements? I mean, what things can you not be able to do, so to speak, I guess?
Right. Well, that goes back to the activities of daily living. So they always refer back to really those main activities of daily living. And if you're going into a nursing home, they say you have to be unable to perform at least 3 of those ADLs. So maybe you can't walk any longer, you need assistance in feeding yourself, and you have difficulty dressing because, maybe you're in a wheelchair and, you're just unable to reach to be able to put your clothing on. You have physical limitations that prevent you from being able to dress yourself completely independently. So that would then qualify you for reaching that Medicaid level or the medical level.
Now, you already mentioned the 4 pillars of eligibility. What assets are exempt from spend down?
Yeah, thankfully there are some things that they exempt. So they give you a couple of things that are protected and that they're not going to count. So the one main thing is your home. You are allowed to have your home, and that is exempt with a couple of little attachments to that rule. So one, if you have a spouse that's going to be living in the home, then there is no equity limit that's required to keep the home exempt. If you're single and your intention is to move back to the home, or you hope to move back to the home at some point, you are allowed to still keep the home as exempt. However, they do have equity limits. So again, it's something that we would check at the time to see what the limit is and make sure that it meets that amount, and then your home would, stay exempt. You're also allowed to have 1 car or 1 vehicle. That would be exempt. If you have a second car, then that would count as an asset. You are allowed. Sorry.
Lynn, what if you're married? Is it 1 car per person, or it's 1 car per family?
1 car per family.
Okay.
So you can only have 1 car, and the second car would count. Like I said, we would look at the whole big picture and see how that factored in, but we would have to factor it in as an asset. And they usually go by, the safe thing is to just see like what the Kelly Blue Book is, and that would give us a good idea of what the car will be valued at. So yeah, one per household. Then you're also allowed to have your personal belongings, like your furniture, your clothes, anything that you own personally, as long as it's not, some type of investment grade, art or something like that, because that they would then again look as an asset. But just your own, personal belongings are all exempt. Some states also exempt retirement plans like a 401k and IRA, but that's not the norm. There's only, a few states that do that. And then, they kind of have all different rules with that as well. So that's something else that we really look at carefully, because of course, if it's exempt, we want to make sure, we're not counting it. And if it is, or it is, that we check that state's regulation on it. And if there's any other, specifications as to whether it's already paying out RMDs or not, sometimes that determines whether it is or isn't counted. So we would make sure we look at that. Then also Medicaid compliant annuities, those are also exempt, but they have to be very specific actual Medicaid compliant annuity, because if it's just a regular annuity, it also counts.
Lynn, tell us about the Medicaid spend down rules.
The Medicaid spend down rules are extremely confusing sometimes, and they change in states, and they do change a little bit also depending on whether you're trying to get Medicaid to go into, like a long-term care facility, or if you're trying to get Medicaid services at home through what they call home and community-based services. So they do vary a little, but in general, when you're looking at the spend down, you have to reach a certain asset limit, which in most states is 2,000. However, again, that does vary. There are some states that are higher than the 2,000, but in general, 2,000 is the limit that the person who is applying for benefits is allowed to have. So you have to make sure that your spend down reaches that amount. Also, you're looking at the 5-year look back period. So Medicaid is going to look back 5 years to see if you gifted anything. If they feel like you gifted or transferred an asset, then they're going to impose a penalty period on that. And they impose the penalty period by something that they call a divisor. And really all that is whatever the average cost of care in a nursing home is for that state or that county within that state, and they divide the difference. And also, just let me say, California is different. They only have a 30-month look-back period, but every other state has a 60-month look-back period. But just want to make sure I mention that. So what happens when somebody has some type of gifting, whether they did it on purpose or intentionally because they were starting to get concerned there was going to be an issue, so they started giving gifts away, then Medicaid imposes just a penalty period of time. It's not any kind of monetary thing. It's just an amount of time that they will not cover you for care. So you would have to basically pay privately until you got through that penalty period.
I'm curious. Let's go. Tell us where you come in. And maybe let's say there's a family who has, some severe medical problems, is going to need long-term care. What happens when you have your initial consultation, whether it's by phone, in person? Tell us about it.
Well, we have our first consultation, usually just kind of chatting to get an idea of what's going on and what the situation is like. And then once I can usually determine if I think it's something that I'm going to be able to help with or not. And then once we have gone through that portion of it and I feel like I might be able to do a little more, then I'll start getting deeper into questions and really trying to get a good picture of the financial situation that they're in right now, and or do they have any other barriers like gifting? Do they have maybe a rental property? Do they have some other type of illiquid asset that they don't know how to get rid of to be able to meet? So we'll talk about all of that stuff, and then we basically come up with a plan to help them see what their options are. Because the worst thing is somebody not realizing that they do have options, or, that they don't talk to somebody and they start doing things before they really know what they're doing and they make the problem worse. So I can kind of help give them a good picture ahead of time, and they may or may not even need assistance. I might tell them, you have a pretty straightforward situation, just do this and you're okay. Don't even worry about doing anything else. Or, I might say, we definitely have some things that we could probably help with, or that I can tell you about, and you can either choose to have us assist, or, they can do it on their own, depending on how difficult the situation is.
What states are the most liberal? I mean, we have 50 states. Do you practice in most of them?
I do. I practice in most of them. There are a few that I don't. It's kind of a hard question to answer because it really depends on the situation. So we're kind of going over, sort of the bird's eye view of everything. We're just looking at the big picture. And when you actually dive into each state, they all have kind of these all little nuances besides, a little bit of difference in their, maybe their caps or their limits. So depending on what your issue is, a state might be better or worse for you. I just had a case where we have somebody who owns a property, his main home in Montana. He has one daughter that lives in Montana, but he also has a daughter that lives in Washington. And they were trying to determine, what was going to be a better fit for them or what made more sense. Would there be a choice that gave him more services? And, in the end, it looked like probably Washington, and for a few different reasons. One being that his income was over the limit for Montana, but not over the limit for Washington. And then, there were a few other things that came up too with the property and, how does the property count now? Is it an asset? Depending on what state he lives on. So there were a whole bunch of different things that we had to look at, but it could be something as simple as that if you have that option, to go to the state or be in the state that your income is still within the income limit.
It's interesting. It seems like ideally someone should come to you to really plan at least 5 years before they need this long-term care. That's probably the ideal situation, isn't it?
It's definitely better if you plan ahead. And actually, the best way to plan ahead is really to get some kind of long-term care insurance or asset-based insurance, because that gives us the time to plan while insurance is paying for care. Because otherwise, there's only a few different strategies to really protect your money or protect your assets if you find that all of a sudden you need care and you're afraid of spending down everything you have. It would have to be in something like an irrevocable trust or something like that, and it would have had to be done 5 years, prior. And, not everybody is really ready to necessarily give up that kind of control or power over their money before they even think they need care yet. So if you at least have some sort of insurance that's going to cover you for 3 or 5 years, that gives us a good amount of time to do this planning while insurance is paying.
Though I've learned it's very, very hard to get long-term care insurance. It used to be very popular. Now, most insurance companies will not do it at all.
Mm-hmm.
So
there is something called asset-based long-term care insurance, which you can do with either a long-term care, a life insurance policy or an annuity, and it has riders that provide for long-term care. So that's another option if somebody is not able to qualify for long-term care insurance.
Curious about another thing. You think of certain states, and you're in just about all 50 states. Those where there are more elderly, such as southern states, such as Florida, Texas, California, probably Louisiana, Arizona. Are these states that are more or less liberal, by way of examples?
Again, I haven't been able to determine it or quantify it in that way. I can't say that I've noticed the states that have a higher population of elderly people or seniors have, better services as far as, what their eligibility requirements are, or, in how you can preserve assets. It hasn't, I don't see a huge difference, based on it having a large senior population.
Okay, that's interesting. It was my curiosity.
Yeah, I have not noticed that. You would think, but no, I haven't noticed it at all.
Lynn, tell us a little bit more about your role in this area.
So really my role is to first help somebody get organized and get a good idea of what their choices are. And if nothing else, like I said, consulting with somebody who may just say, you don't even need me. But the point is, it's better to have somebody do that than to not really know. So I want to help somebody kind of understand their situation, understand what their options are, so that then they can, make an educated decision as to what makes the most sense for them. I'm there to help them preserve assets and reallocate assets in Medicaid compliant ways if, that's something that they need, or just to make sure that they're doing something in the proper sequence. I mean, one of the most challenging things that I come across is that somebody, will realize what's going on. They know that they need to start spending down their money. And so they just start, buying things or spending money on things that they believe are, not going to go against them as a gift later on. And they get either into a worse situation, and that they do create a penalty, or, they spend more money than they need to. I had a gentleman just recently, and he had about $70,000. He was in a state where he was going to be allowed to keep half the marital assets. He was the spouse. So when you're going into a facility or you need home-based care, your spouse is allowed to keep a certain amount of assets. So depending on the state, there's a couple of different things that you have to look at. But in his state, he was allowed to keep half the assets that he and his wife owned. So he was trying to get home care for his wife. And he knew, okay, I have 70,000, I can keep 35. So he just started spending money. He went and bought, a better car, which is fine. You're allowed to do that. And he did a couple of other things. He spent down his money to about 40,000 by the time we were speaking. And in his case, that was really a detriment, because he spent down a lot more money than he should have, because now Medicaid goes and they do what they call a financial assessment. When you're doing home care, you don't have a snapshot date, and a snapshot date is the date Medicaid determines how much money you have, what you can keep, what you need to have to be eligible, and what you might need to spend down. When you go into a nursing home and you're there for 30 days, the day you went into the nursing home is your snapshot date. But when you're getting home care, snapshot date's not determined until you request that financial assessment. So what he basically did was he spent his money down to 40,000. Now we were requesting the financial assessment, and Medicaid said, oh, you could keep 20,000. Whereas if he hadn't spent his money down, he would have kept 35,000. So now he really, spent more than he needed to. And so something as simple as just doing it at the wrong time can be really costly. So you really want to make sure that you're doing everything in the correct process, as well as, making sure you're following all the guidelines.
Lynn, how can someone reach you? What's the best way?
They can either call me, or they can go to my website. Do you want me to just read it?
Yeah, tell us your website.
The website is www.Medi-Asset So it's.
Lynn, we're out of time. Give us 5 quick takeaways before we sign off.
Medicare only covers 100 days maximum, so don't depend on Medicare. Medicaid is the largest payer of long-term care, but they do have strict eligibility requirements, so you want to make sure you really understand what that is. You do not have to go broke to get Medicaid and get help. Many more people will qualify for services than they believe. A lot of people just feel like there's no way, there's no chance they would qualify for assistance, when in reality they really can. And like we were just talking about, it's always best to consult with a Medicaid planner to find out, even if it's only to find out you don't need us. It's just better to know than, to just go off and do things unintentionally.
Lynn, we're out of time. We covered a lot of information that's very pertinent and relevant. I want to thank you so much for being our guest on Gracefully Graying. And I want to thank our viewers for watching Gracefully Graying. Again, let me remind you that you can find Lynn's interview on our YouTube channel, and also go to our Gracefully Graying website and share it and like it. Thank you again.